If you are retired, what I am about to say may upset you, and that might be the most valuable thing you hear today, because retirement almost destroyed my life. Not slowly, not quietly. It nearly erased everything I built, my money, my family, my sanity. And if one brutal event had not happened, you would never hear this story from a billionaire. You would hear it from a broken person sitting alone in a tiny apartment, wondering where everything went wrong. Let me tell you something that people hate hearing. Retirement is not freedom. Retirement is a test, a dangerous one, and most people fail it. I know this because at 55 I watch people around me vanish from their own lives. They stop taking risks. They stop building. They start shrinking, day by day, slowly turning into spectators in their own story. People see headlines today: self-made billionaire, business empire, financial genius. Those headlines are lies, because I started from a place so humiliating that even my closest friends never heard the full story. I was not rich. I was not connected. I was not educated in elite schools. At 39 I had something far worse: comfort, a stable career, a predictable paycheck, a peaceful routine, and a dangerous belief. I believed stability meant safety. Many retirees believe the same thing, but stability is often just slow decay that feels comfortable. My life at the time looked perfect from the outside. Nice house, 2 cars, a respectable job in corporate finance. Colleagues respected me. Neighbors envied my routine. I believed I had won, until one Tuesday afternoon destroyed that illusion. It started with a meeting, a short meeting, 15 minutes long. That meeting erased 12 years of my life. I remember the room clearly. Cold air, grey table, a glass wall that showed the city skyline, 2 executives sitting across from me. Neither of them could hold eye contact, and when someone avoids your eyes, your instincts already know what is coming. One of them cleared their throat, then said the sentence that changed everything. The company was restructuring. My department was being dissolved. My position was no longer necessary. Just like that, 12 years ended in less than 20 seconds. They slid a folder across the table. Severance package, corporate language, polite smiles. I walked out carrying a cardboard box filled with random desk items, a coffee mug, a notebook, a framed photo. That was my entire professional legacy. But losing that job was not the real disaster. The real disaster began when I went home. Because unemployment does something strange to relationships. It exposes hidden tensions, and the next conversation changed everything. That night someone close to me said something that still echoes in my mind. They looked directly at me and said, "You should have retired earlier. You worked enough." It sounded supportive. It sounded kind. But something inside me felt wrong. Retire. At 41. Live quietly. Spend savings. Wait for time to pass. The idea felt like surrender. Yet the pressure began growing from every direction. Friends told me the same thing. "You have savings. Relax." Family members said it too. "You worked hard. You deserve rest." But deep inside something felt dangerous about that advice. I could not explain it then. I understand it now. Retirement is often disguised as reward, but for many people it becomes a slow loss of identity. Work is not just income. Work is tension, movement, purpose, conflict, and once that disappears, strange things start happening in the mind. At first retirement feels like relief, then boredom creeps in, then anxiety, then regret. I had not even retired yet, and I could feel that void approaching. But what happened next made the situation far worse. 3 months after losing my job, the savings started shrinking faster than I expected. Insurance, mortgage, unexpected expenses. Every week the numbers looked worse. But the real shock came when I checked my investment portfolio. A market crash had wiped out a massive portion of my savings. Years of planning disappeared almost overnight. I remember staring at the screen, unable to move. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. I was 41 years old, unemployed, financially wounded, and everyone around me wanted me to stop trying. That was the moment retirement tried to claim me. But the real disaster had not even begun, because just when I thought my situation could not get worse, someone I trusted made a decision that dragged me into a legal battle that nearly destroyed my future. A battle that forced me to rebuild my life from absolute zero. A battle that accidentally turned me into a billionaire. But before that transformation happened, I had to survive the betrayal that came from the last person I ever expected. And that betrayal began with a phone call at midnight. A phone call that ended with 3 words that froze my blood. "You are being sued." And that lawsuit would push me into the most dangerous gamble of my life. A gamble that every rational person said would ruin me forever. They were wrong. But the price of proving them wrong nearly cost me everything.
And if you are retired, or planning to retire, what happened next might change the way you see the rest of your life.
Because the advice I learned from that disaster is brutally simple. Stop building, and the world quietly begins replacing you. But what I did next shocked everyone who knew me, including the lawyers preparing to take everything I had left. And that moment was the true beginning of my story. Below is the continuation of the story, with the next chapter number included, maintaining the same narration style, pacing and suspense. Midnight calls rarely bring good news. This one arrived like a hammer through glass. The phone rang 3 times before I picked it up. A calm voice waited on the other end. Too calm. That kind of calm usually hides something violent. The voice said my name, then the sentence that froze the room. You are being sued. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone with a similar name. Maybe a misunderstanding. But the lawyer on the phone continued speaking, and every word tightened the knot in my chest. The lawsuit involved a failed investment. A business deal connected to someone very close to me. Someone who had used my name. Someone who had used my credibility. Without telling me. The accusation was simple. Fraud. Financial deception. Misrepresentation. 3 words that can erase a life. And suddenly my job loss felt small compared to what was coming. The lawyer explained the situation slowly. My signature had been used on several documents. Contracts tied to a project that collapsed months earlier. Investors had lost millions. They wanted someone to blame, and my name was now sitting at the top of their list. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. My mind tried to reconstruct the past year. Every conversation, every meeting, every favor I had agreed to help with. Then one memory surfaced. A conversation 6 months earlier. Someone close to me had asked for help with a startup investment. Nothing unusual. Just advice. Just a quick look at paperwork. I trusted them. I trusted their intentions. That trust now felt like a trap closing around my neck. The next morning confirmed the nightmare. A thick envelope arrived at my door. Legal documents. Court filings. Financial claims that stretched across dozens of pages. Investors demanding compensation. Lawyers demanding answers. My name printed everywhere. I felt the room spinning. I had just lost my job. My savings were shrinking. Now I was staring at a lawsuit that could bury me in debt for the rest of my life. I needed answers. I needed the truth. So I drove straight to the person who started all of this. The conversation that followed changed the way I saw trust forever. When I arrived, they already knew why I was there. The look on their face told me everything before a single word was spoken. Fear, guilt, avoidance. They admitted it within minutes. They had used my reputation to attract investors. They believed the business would succeed. They believed the risk was temporary. They believed they could fix everything before I ever noticed. But the project collapsed. Money disappeared. Investors became furious. And when lawyers started searching for responsibility, my name was sitting on the paperwork. I asked one simple question. Why? The answer hurt more than the betrayal itself. They said investors trusted me more than them. My credibility had value. My name opened doors. So they used it. Without telling me. Without warning me. Without thinking about what could happen if things went wrong. Now things had gone terribly wrong. The investors wanted justice. The courts wanted accountability. And my future was about to be dragged through a brutal legal fight. Lawyers started calling every day. Emails filled my inbox. Financial records were requested. Meetings were scheduled. Every conversation carried the same underlying message. This could destroy you. Because lawsuits do not just attack your finances. They attack your reputation, your relationships, your mental stability, and the stress begins spreading into every corner of your life. Weeks turned into months. The legal fees alone started draining my remaining savings. Every hour with an attorney cost more than most people earn in a day. I began waking up at night calculating numbers in my head. How long could I survive this? How long before everything collapsed? That is when I noticed something strange. The people who once respected me had grown distant. Phone calls slowed down. Invitations stopped. Rumors spread quietly through professional circles. Some believed I was guilty. Others simply avoided the risk of being associated with the situation. The isolation became heavy. But something unexpected happened during those dark weeks. Pressure started changing the way I thought. Fear slowly turned into anger. Then anger turned into clarity. I realized something dangerous. If I played defense in this lawsuit, I would lose, even if I won the case years later. The legal costs alone could ruin me. Waiting passively would drain everything I had left.
That realization forced me to make a decision that terrified even my own lawyer. I needed to create money, fast, enough money to survive the legal war, enough money to protect my future. But there was a problem. I had no job, my reputation was damaged, investors were suspicious, and every rational person around me said the same thing: lay low, protect what remains, wait for the case to resolve. That advice sounded logical, safe, responsible, but safe decisions rarely rebuild destroyed lives. I started studying the market again, hours every day, looking for opportunities hidden inside chaos. Economic downturns always create them. Most people panic during financial storms.
A few people build empires. One particular industry kept appearing in my research, an industry collapsing under debt and mismanagement. Assets were selling for fractions of their real value. Factories, warehouses, equipment, entire companies desperate for buyers. That was the moment a dangerous idea entered my mind. What if I bought one? Not a healthy company, not a safe investment, a dying one. A company everyone else believed was finished. If it survived, the reward would be enormous. If it failed, I would lose the last of my savings. My lawyer called the idea reckless. Friends called it insane. Family called it irresponsible. But the pressure of the lawsuit had changed something inside me. Fear was already destroying my life. So I made a decision that still shocks people when they hear this story. While being sued for millions of dollars, while unemployed, while watching my savings disappear, I decided to buy a collapsing company. And the deal I signed 2 weeks later placed my entire future on a knife edge. Because hidden inside that company was a secret that would later ignite a courtroom battle even more dangerous than the first one. A secret my future business partner would try to steal. And that betrayal would push the fight into a courtroom packed with reporters. But at that moment, sitting in a small office signing the purchase agreement, I believed I was simply taking a risk to survive. I had no idea that decision was about to start the chain reaction that would eventually turn me into a billionaire and nearly send someone else to prison. Buying a collapsing company while facing a lawsuit sounds irrational. That is exactly what most people told me. My lawyer stared across the table and rubbed their forehead. They said something very direct. If this fails, the lawsuit will not be your biggest problem. Bankruptcy will. I understood the risk. What they did not understand was something simple. I was already standing at the edge of ruin. When someone is already close to losing everything, fear starts losing its power. The company I planned to buy was not famous. Most people had never heard its name. It owned a medium-sized manufacturing facility outside the city. For years the business produced specialized mechanical parts for construction equipment. Nothing glamorous, nothing flashy, but something strange caught my attention. Despite the company collapsing financially, its equipment was extremely valuable. The machines alone were worth far more than the asking price. Debt had crushed the business. Poor management had drained its cash. Suppliers had stopped trusting it. Employees were leaving. The owner wanted out before everything burned completely. I studied the financial statements every night. 3 hours, sometimes 4. Numbers began revealing patterns. The company was not dying because the product failed. It was dying because the owner had taken massive loans to expand too quickly. Interest payments swallowed their cash flow. Banks tightened pressure. Suppliers demanded payment. And once panic began, the business suffocated. But the actual demand for the product still existed. Competitors were quietly raising their prices because supply was shrinking. That meant something powerful. If I could stabilize the company, even temporarily, profits could return very quickly. There was only one problem. I did not have enough money. My savings were already shrinking because of legal costs. Buying the company required more capital than I could safely risk. That is when another character entered the story, a person who would later become the center of my biggest betrayal. Their name does not matter. What matters is the role they played. This person had money, a lot of it. They were known in business circles for aggressive investments, sharp mind, sharp instincts. People described them as someone who could smell opportunity from across the city. I arranged a meeting. When we sat across from each other, they listened quietly while I explained the situation. The failing company, the undervalued assets, the market opportunity, the potential recovery. They asked very few questions. That usually means 2 possibilities. Either someone is uninterested, or they are calculating something quietly. After 30 minutes, they leaned back in their chair and said something that surprised me. I will fund half. Just like that,
But there was a condition. They wanted ownership, equal ownership, 50%. At that moment, I had two choices: reject the deal and abandon the opportunity, or accept a partner I barely knew. I agreed. The paperwork moved quickly. Banks approved limited financing. We closed the deal. Suddenly, I owned half of a dying manufacturing company, and I was still fighting a lawsuit that could take everything away. The first week inside the company revealed how bad the situation really was. Machines were sitting idle. Employees were frustrated. Several suppliers had already refused to deliver raw materials. One of the supervisors told me something alarming. Production had nearly stopped for weeks before we arrived. Cash flow was almost zero. But there was also something encouraging. Several major clients were still calling the company, asking when production would resume. They wanted the product. They simply did not trust the old management anymore. Trust can collapse quickly in business. Rebuilding it requires relentless effort. For the next 3 months, I practically lived inside that factory. I arrived before sunrise, left long after midnight. I spoke with every employee, every supplier, every customer, one conversation at a time, one promise at a time. Slowly things began moving again. Machines started running. Orders began returning. Suppliers cautiously resumed deliveries. And then something unexpected happened. A new construction boom started across several regions. Demand for equipment parts exploded. Our company suddenly became one of the few suppliers still operating. Orders multiplied faster than we expected. The factory started running around the clock. Revenue surged. Cash flow returned. For the first time since the lawsuit began, I felt something I had not experienced in months: hope. But success attracts attention. Competitors started watching us. Former clients returned. Investors began asking questions. And inside the company, something else was changing. My partner. At first everything seemed professional, efficient, businesslike, but subtle signs began appearing. Decisions made without informing me.
Financial transfers that required explanation. Conversations with suppliers happening privately. Then one afternoon a senior accountant approached me quietly. They looked nervous, the kind of nervous someone feels when they know information that could cause serious conflict. They handed me a set of documents, financial records, internal transfers, emails. My partner had been moving company assets, not stealing directly, not in a way that looked obvious, but shifting ownership of several valuable contracts into a separate company, a company controlled entirely by them. At first I refused to believe it, but the documents were clear. My partner was preparing something designed to move profits away from our shared business, something that would leave me holding the risk while they captured the reward. That night I reviewed every document carefully, every email, every transfer. The pattern became obvious. They planned to strip the company slowly, legally, quietly, and by the time I realized what happened, it would be too late. The next morning I confronted them. The conversation was cold, calculated. They denied everything, called it misunderstanding, normal restructuring, standard business strategy. But I had already spoken with a lawyer before the meeting, and that lawyer had said something very clear. If what you suspect is true, this will end in court. That prediction came true faster than anyone expected, because 2 weeks later my partner made a move that forced the conflict into public view. They attempted to take full control of the company, using a legal maneuver hidden inside our ownership agreement, a clause most people would have overlooked. But that clause triggered something explosive, a corporate dispute large enough to attract national media. Lawyers on both sides prepared for war. Court hearings were scheduled. Financial records were subpoenaed. And suddenly I was fighting two massive legal battles at the same time: the original lawsuit that threatened my past, and a corporate war that threatened my future. What nobody inside that courtroom realized was that the evidence I had gathered against my partner would reveal something far darker than simple greed, something that would shock the judge, something that would change the direction of the entire case. And when that evidence finally surfaced, the courtroom went silent, because the person trying to take my company had been hiding a financial secret worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a secret they believed no one would ever uncover. They were wrong, and the moment that secret reached the courtroom, the balance of power shifted forever. But the way it happened nearly destroyed me in the process. The courtroom smelled like tension, cold air, wooden benches, dozens of people waiting quietly for something explosive to happen. That morning my life stood between two possible endings: total collapse, or a chance to rebuild everything. Reporters sat near the back wall. Word had spread about the corporate fight. Two owners, a rapidly recovering company, accusations of hidden financial transfers.
It had all the ingredients people enjoy watching from a safe distance. But for me, this was not entertainment. This was survival. My partner entered the courtroom surrounded by lawyers, expensive suits, perfect confidence. They moved with the posture of someone who believed victory was guaranteed. Their legal team had built a powerful argument. According to them, I had mismanaged the company. They claimed my decisions threatened the business. They used the ownership clause in our contract to justify removing me. A technical maneuver. Cold. Strategic. If the judge approved it, they would gain full control, and I would walk away with nothing. Months of rebuilding. Months of sleepless nights. All gone. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered quietly, "Stay calm. Let them speak." So I watched. Their attorney stood and began presenting their narrative. Every sentence was polished. They described me as reckless, impulsive, financially unstable. They even referenced the lawsuit I was already fighting. The implication was obvious. Someone facing legal trouble should not control a company. Each statement was designed to plant doubt in the judge's mind, and I could feel the tension building inside my chest. But we had something they did not expect: evidence. Weeks earlier, the accountant had given me documents that changed everything. Financial transfers, private contracts, emails between my partner and outside companies. At first, those documents looked confusing. Then patterns began appearing. My partner had been redirecting several high-value contracts into a separate entity. That entity had a different name, but the ownership structure told the truth. They controlled it completely, which meant profits from those contracts would never appear in our shared company. Money was being siphoned away slowly, legally disguised. If no one noticed early enough, the company would eventually appear weak again, and my partner would argue that my leadership caused the decline. That was their strategy. Slow sabotage, then full takeover. My lawyer stood when it was our turn. They spoke calmly, measured, almost quiet. Then they introduced the documents. One by one, emails appeared on the courtroom screen. Financial transfers followed. Ownership records of the hidden company appeared next. At first, the judge studied them silently. Then the atmosphere inside the room began shifting. The confidence on my partner's face faded. Their attorneys started whispering urgently, because something inside those records was worse than anyone expected. One of the contracts being redirected involved government infrastructure, large-scale supply agreements, millions of dollars, and those agreements required strict disclosure rules. But my partner had hidden their control of the separate company, which meant they were receiving profits from both sides of the same deal. That kind of financial behavior attracts serious attention, not just civil lawsuits, criminal investigations. The judge paused the hearing and reviewed the documents carefully. Minutes passed slowly. No one in the courtroom spoke. When the judge finally looked up, their expression had changed. They asked a direct question. Were these transfers disclosed to the co-owner? My partner hesitated, just for a moment, but that moment said everything.
The answer was no. The judge requested additional documentation immediately. The hearing was extended. Lawyers rushed through stacks of papers. What began as a corporate ownership dispute had now turned into something much larger: potential financial misconduct, possibly fraud. Reporters started typing furiously. Phones vibrated across the room. News was spreading outside the courtroom. My partner's legal team attempted to redirect the discussion. They argued the documents were incomplete, misinterpreted, taken out of context, but the evidence kept expanding. Every financial trail pointed in the same direction. Contracts moved, payments redirected, ownership hidden. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted completely. Instead of questioning my leadership, the judge began questioning my partner's actions. Then something happened that even my lawyer did not expect. The judge ordered an immediate freeze on the company ownership structure. My partner could not remove me. They could not alter financial positions. Everything would remain locked until a deeper investigation concluded. That decision changed the balance instantly. The takeover attempt had failed, but the battle was far from over. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded both sides. Cameras, questions, microphones pushed forward. I said very little. The case was still active. Anything careless could create new problems. But the pressure on my partner had multiplied. Investigators began requesting financial records. Regulatory agencies showed interest. The hidden contracts were now public knowledge, and the consequences were beginning to grow. Inside the company, employees watched everything unfold online. Clients started calling again. Some expressed concern. Others quietly showed support. Trust was shifting back toward me. But legal wars rarely end quickly. Months of hearings followed. Financial audits expanded. More documents appeared. And with every new discovery, the situation became more serious for my partner. Eventually, their legal team approached mine privately. They wanted settlement discussions, quiet negotiations, damage control. My lawyer listened carefully, then delivered the message that surprised them. I was not interested in surrendering control. I wanted the company, fully, and the evidence now gave me leverage. Negotiations lasted weeks, tense meetings inside conference rooms, stacks of legal documents covering long tables. Finally, an agreement was reached. My partner would exit the company. They would transfer their shares. They would withdraw their takeover claims. In exchange, several civil accusations would remain separate from criminal investigations. The deal closed quietly. No celebration, no dramatic announcement, just signatures on paper. When the process finished, something remarkable had happened. The company that nearly collapsed, the company at the center of lawsuits and betrayals, was now entirely mine. But the story did not end there, because the following year, something extraordinary occurred. A construction boom intensified across multiple countries. Demand for our specialized parts exploded beyond anything I had predicted. Factories expanded. New contracts appeared. Investors started offering massive buyout proposals. And one particular acquisition offer arrived that changed everything. The number written on that document was so large I had to read it twice, then a third time. Because the company I bought while being sued, the company everyone believed was dying, had now reached a valuation that crossed a line few businesses ever reach. $1 billion. That was the moment the headlines began appearing. Self-made billionaire, business triumph, financial mastermind. But the truth behind that headline was much darker, because while my company was reaching that milestone, another courtroom was preparing to deliver a decision about the lawsuit that started this entire chain of events, a decision that could still erase everything I had built. And the person responsible for dragging my name into that lawsuit was about to face the judge as well. What happened during that final hearing forced me to confront something painful. Success does not erase betrayal. It only reveals who was responsible for it. And when the judge delivered the final verdict, the room fell completely silent. The second courtroom felt heavier than the first. The corporate war had been brutal, but this case was different. This one reached deeper, because the person responsible for dragging my name into the lawsuit was not a business rival, not a competitor, not an enemy. It was someone who had once sat at my dinner table, someone who had shared my trust. That fact made the room feel colder. The hearing had been delayed for months, while the corporate investigation unfolded. Now the judge was ready to deliver a decision. The investors sat across the aisle. Their lawyers surrounded them like a protective wall. They believed I was responsible for their losses. From their perspective, my name on the documents made me part of the deception. The truth was more complicated and painfully personal. The person who had used my reputation to secure those investments was sitting 3 rows behind me. They avoided eye contact, their shoulders slightly lowered, as if the weight of the entire situation had finally caught up with them. When the judge entered the courtroom, everyone stood. Silence settled immediately. The judge began speaking in a calm tone. They reviewed the timeline, the investment proposal, the signatures, the financial transfers, every detail that had dragged this case through months of legal arguments. Then the judge addressed the central question. Had I knowingly participated in misleading the investors? My lawyer had built the defense carefully. We presented emails, meeting records, bank documentation, everything showing that I had never approved the deal, never received the funds, never controlled the project. The evidence revealed a painful reality. My identity had been used as a shield. Investors trusted my reputation. That trust opened the door for the deal. But I had not known the full details. The judge paused while reviewing the documents once more. Those seconds felt endless. A single ruling could still destroy everything. Even though my company was now worth extraordinary amounts, a massive legal judgment could drain it quickly. Financial victories can disappear overnight when courts get involved. Then the judge delivered the words that released months of pressure from my chest. The court found no evidence that I had intentionally misled the investors. My name had been used without proper authorization. Responsibility would shift toward the person who organized the investment, the person sitting behind me. The room reacted immediately. Whispers spread across the benches. Reporters began typing again. The investors looked frustrated but not surprised. Their lawyers had already prepared for that possibility, but the hearing was not finished, because the judge still needed to address the damages. The failed project had lost millions. Someone had to answer for it. The person behind me stood slowly when their name was called. Their voice trembled while explaining their decisions. They believed the business would succeed. They believed the risk was temporary. They believed they could repair everything before anyone noticed. The judge listened without interruption. Then came the ruling. Financial responsibility would fall directly on them. The court ordered repayment agreements, asset liquidation, and long-term financial penalties. The legal language sounded clinical, but the meaning was devastating. Years of consequences, years of rebuilding, years of carrying the weight of a single reckless decision. As the hearing ended, people began leaving the courtroom. I remained seated for a moment. The emotional storm that had followed me for nearly 2 years was finally fading. Victory should have felt satisfying, but the feeling inside me was something else, a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Because legal battles often destroy more than money. They destroy relationships, trust, memories. When I finally stood and walked toward the exit, the person behind me spoke quietly. They asked if we could talk. For a moment I considered refusing. Anger had lived inside me for months, but I stopped walking. We stepped into a quiet hallway outside the courtroom. They looked exhausted, their voice barely steady. They apologized, not with dramatic speeches, just a few honest sentences. They admitted fear had driven their decisions. Fear of failure, fear of disappointing investors, fear of losing credibility. So they borrowed mine, without permission, without thinking about the consequences. I listened silently, because something inside me had already shifted during the last year. Betrayal had pushed me through pressure I never expected. But that same pressure had forced me to build something extraordinary. The company, the court victory, the financial transformation. All of it grew from chaos. And standing there in that hallway, I realized something strange. The people who try to break you sometimes become the reason you rebuild stronger. That realization did not erase the damage, but it changed how I saw the past. We ended the conversation quietly. No dramatic reconciliation, no promises, just acceptance that life had moved us onto different paths. Outside the courthouse, sunlight felt brighter than usual. My phone vibrated with messages from lawyers, investors, and journalists. News about the verdict was spreading quickly. But another message arrived that demanded my attention immediately. It came from the board of directors inside my company. An acquisition group had returned with a new proposal, a much larger proposal. They wanted to buy the entire company, every factory, every contract, every machine. The number they offered made the previous bid look small, extremely small. I walked to a nearby bench and read the document carefully. The valuation crossed a line that only a small number of businesses ever reach, several $1 billion. The irony felt almost unreal. Just 2 years earlier I had been unemployed, sued, and nearly bankrupt. Now global investors were competing to purchase the company I built during that storm. But money was not the only thing changing. The experience had reshaped the way I viewed life, especially the idea that started this entire story, retirement. Because during the darkest moments of those legal battles, many people told me the same thing. Stop fighting. Slow down. Accept what remains. But if I had listened to that advice, none of this would exist. No company. No comeback. No lessons worth sharing. And that realization forced me to confront a question that most retirees never ask themselves. What actually happens to a person when they stop building something meaningful? That question became the reason I began speaking publicly. Not about wealth, not about business strategies, about purpose. Because after everything I survived, one truth became painfully clear. Stopping too early might be the most dangerous decision people make. And the advice I give retirees now shocks them every time they hear it. But the moment I explain what happened during the hardest year of my life, their perspective begins changing immediately. A few months after the courtrooms emptied and the lawsuits ended, I received an invitation that changed the direction of my voice. Not my business, my voice. A financial conference asked me to speak. Hundreds of attendees, most of them retirees, people who had spent decades working and had now stepped away from the pressure. They wanted me to talk about success, about wealth, about how someone becomes a billionaire. But that was not the story I wanted to tell, because the number in my bank account was not the real lesson. The real lesson lived inside the chaos that came before it. When I walked onto that stage, the room was quiet. Hundreds of faces looking forward, most of them calm, relaxed, people who believed the hardest part of life was already behind them. I began with a simple sentence. I almost retired once. That line caught their attention immediately, because they expected confidence, victory. Instead, I told them about the day I lost my job, the shrinking savings, the lawsuit that threatened everything, the collapsing company that everyone warned me not to touch. I watched their expressions change while the story unfolded. Many of them nodded during the early part. Losing a job, financial pressure. They understood those fears.
But when I reached the moment where people encouraged me to stop trying, the room became very still, because that moment sounded familiar to them. For many people, retirement is presented as the reward at the end of a long road. Work hard for decades, then step away, relax. But what nobody explains clearly is what happens after that moment. Because purpose does not retire, the mind does not retire.
Human ambition does not retire. When those forces lose direction, strange things begin happening. I told them something that made several people shift uncomfortably in their chairs. I do not believe retirement is the finish line people think it is. Some people smiled. Others crossed their arms. I continued speaking. When people stop building something meaningful, life becomes smaller. Not immediately. It happens quietly. Days become slower. Goals disappear. Conversations begin repeating themselves. Then something deeper starts fading. Confidence, energy, the sense that tomorrow might hold something challenging. I explained how during my darkest year, when lawyers were attacking from every direction, I felt more alive than during comfortable years of stability. Pressure forced me to think clearly, to move, to solve problems, to grow. Comfort had never done that. Comfort had slowly made me passive. That sentence created a ripple through the audience. One retiree raised their hand and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "So you think people should never stop working?" I shook my head. That was not the message. Working endlessly without purpose can become just another trap. The real issue is not work. The real issue is growth. Humans deteriorate when they stop moving towards something. That something can be a business, a project, a mission, a new challenge, but it cannot be nothing, because nothing eventually turns into decline. I told them about people I had watched retire early. At first they celebrated travel, leisure, freedom. Then gradually the energy faded. Health problems appeared. Mental sharpness softened. Their identity shrank into memories of who they used to be. That is when I delivered the line that would later spread across social media. If you retire from purpose, life quietly retires from you. The room became silent again. Not uncomfortable silence, thinking silence. Because many people in that audience had never heard someone describe retirement this way. They had been promised relaxation, peace, freedom from responsibility. But responsibility is often the engine that keeps people sharp, the engine that keeps people engaged with the world. After the presentation, several retirees approached me privately. Some looked defensive, others looked curious. One person told me something that stayed with me long after that conference ended. They said retirement had felt wonderful for the first year. Then slowly their days started blending together. No pressure, no urgency, no reason to wake up early. They realized they were drifting, not failing. Drifting. That word describes the hidden danger perfectly. Drifting does not feel like collapse. It feels like quiet movement toward smaller possibilities. And most people do not notice it until the momentum becomes difficult to reverse. That conversation confirmed something I had already suspected. The brutal advice retirees need is rarely about money. Most financial advisors focus on saving strategies, investment allocations, tax efficiency. Those things matter, but they miss something deeper. Purpose is a form of wealth, and losing it can damage a life faster than losing money. When the conference ended, I returned home with a strange realization. The story of my legal battles and business victories had become something else, a warning, not about lawsuits, not about investments, about what happens when people believe their most productive years are already behind them. Because the truth I learned during those chaotic years was simple. Age does not decide when someone stops growing. Belief does. If someone believes their best work is finished, their behavior slowly begins confirming that belief. Opportunities are ignored, risks are avoided, curiosity fades. But if someone believes they are still capable of building something meaningful, the mind continues searching for challenges, the body continues moving, energy continues returning. I was 55 when my company crossed the $1 billion mark. Most people would call that late success. I call it proof that momentum does not belong to youth. Momentum belongs to people who refuse to stop creating it. But the most shocking part of my story did not happen during the lawsuits or the business wars. It happened later, when I decided to test my own advice. Because after selling a portion of my company and securing financial independence beyond anything I had imagined, I tried doing what many retirees dream about. I tried stopping.
What happened during those months revealed something terrifying, and it forced me to create the brutal rules I now give every retiree who asks for advice, rules that most people resist hearing, but once they understand them, their entire view of retirement begins changing, because what happened when I tried living without a mission shocked me more than any courtroom battle I had faced before. When the company reached a valuation beyond $1 billion, people around me started repeating the same sentence: "You can retire now." Friends said it, financial advisors said it, even strangers said it after hearing my story. From their perspective, the logic was obvious: enough money to live several lifetimes, years of intense pressure behind me, courtrooms, betrayals, business battles. They believed it was time to step away, so I decided to try. Not forever, just long enough to see what retirement actually felt like. The first few weeks were pleasant. I slept longer, morning alarms disappeared, my calendar suddenly looked empty, no urgent meetings, no legal calls, no financial emergencies demanding immediate decisions. People imagine this moment as paradise. At first it felt exactly like that: quiet mornings, slow afternoons, freedom to go anywhere, freedom to do nothing. But something unexpected began happening after the second month. The energy that had driven me for years started fading, not dramatically, subtly. I woke up later each day. My mind felt slower. Decisions that once took seconds began taking minutes. Then something more disturbing appeared: restlessness. I would walk through my house trying to find something meaningful to do. Reading books helped temporarily. Travel helped briefly. But none of it created the same sense of movement I had felt during my working years. Then one morning I noticed a pattern that frightened me. I had started living inside my past. Conversations with friends drifted toward old stories, legal victories,
business negotiations, moments of triumph, moments of survival. The past had become my most interesting topic. That realization felt dangerous, because when someone begins living mostly inside past achievements, the future slowly becomes smaller. I remembered something I once observed about retired executives. Many of them repeated the same stories again and again. They were not boring people. They had simply stopped creating new chapters. Without new challenges, life turns into a museum of memories. And museums are places people visit briefly, not places where they live. One afternoon I sat alone on the patio staring across the yard. No deadlines, no pressure, no problems to solve. Everything looked peaceful. Yet inside my chest something felt deeply uncomfortable. The calm felt artificial, like a pause button had been pressed on my life. That was the moment I understood something brutal about retirement. Freedom without direction can quietly become emptiness. That realization triggered a memory from the darkest year of my life, the year when lawyers attacked from every direction, the year when I bought a collapsing company while being sued. Those months were chaotic, uncertain, terrifying, but I had never felt empty during that period. Every day demanded action. Every hour required decisions. The pressure forced my mind to stay sharp. The mission kept my energy alive. Sitting there on that patio, I realized something strange. The most peaceful period of my life had also become the most mentally stagnant. That frightened me, because stagnation rarely stays harmless. It spreads. Mental stagnation becomes physical stagnation. Physical stagnation becomes emotional stagnation. Then suddenly years pass without meaningful progress, and the person who once built remarkable things begins shrinking quietly. I stood up and walked back inside, not because something dramatic had happened, because something subtle had become clear. I was not designed for passive living. Many people are not, but society convinces them that stopping is the ultimate reward. The next day I reopened my notebooks, the same notebooks I had used during the legal battles, pages filled with business ideas, market observations, random thoughts about industries changing faster than people realize. As I reviewed those notes, energy returned immediately. Ideas began connecting again. Possibilities started forming. Within hours I felt the same mental momentum that had been missing for months. That experience confirmed something powerful. Purpose fuels energy. Without purpose the mind slowly powers down. So I made a decision that surprised many people. I ended my experiment with retirement. Completely. Not because I needed more money. Because I needed movement, creation, progress. I began investing in new companies. Not safe companies. Not passive investments. Real businesses facing real problems. Places where leadership mattered. Places where decisions carried consequences. Immediately my schedule filled again. Meetings,
strategy discussions, operational challenges, and something fascinating happened. My energy levels returned to what they had been during the most intense years of my career. The body followed the mind. Sleep improved. Focus sharpened. Curiosity expanded again. It felt as if life had restarted. That experience forced me to create a set of rules I now share with every retiree who asks for advice. They are not comfortable rules. Some people reject them immediately. Others feel offended. But the people who listen carefully usually experience a shift in perspective, because the rules are built from something real, not theory, experience. I had lived both sides, the chaos of building under pressure, and the quiet emptiness of stepping away too early. The contrast between those two states revealed something that most retirement plans ignore completely. Money alone cannot sustain a fulfilling life. Purpose must continue operating long after financial independence arrives. That realization became the foundation of what I now call brutal retirement advice. Advice that begins with a sentence most people have never heard from a billionaire. If your plan is to stop contributing to the world, retirement will punish you. And the next rule I share with retirees shocks them even more, because it challenges one of the biggest assumptions people carry about aging, an assumption that quietly destroys ambition in millions of lives every year. The belief that their most productive years are already finished. That belief is one of the most dangerous lies society repeats. When I speak to retirees now, I often start with a question, not about money, not about savings, a much more uncomfortable question. What are you building right now? Most people hesitate before answering. Some laugh nervously. Others say they are enjoying rest, relaxation, freedom. Those answers sound pleasant, but they reveal something deeper. Many people step into retirement without replacing the mission that once structured their lives. For decades, their days were guided by responsibility, deadlines, people depending on them, problems that demanded solutions. Then one day that structure disappears, and nothing replaces it. That is where the slow erosion begins. I learned this lesson during the months when I attempted living without direction. The quiet felt good at first, then it became heavy. The human mind needs resistance, something pushing back, something requiring effort. Without resistance, muscles weaken. The same principle applies to ambition. During one of my talks, a man in the audience stood up and challenged me. He looked irritated. "Are you saying people should never relax after working for 40 years? His frustration was understandable. Many people view retirement as compensation for decades of pressure. I explained the difference. Rest is healthy. Permanent disengagement is dangerous. Short breaks restore energy. Permanent withdrawal drains it. Those two experiences feel similar at first, but over time their outcomes diverge dramatically. The room listened carefully while I shared another observation. The people who age with the most energy usually follow a pattern. They never stop contributing. Sometimes they mentor younger entrepreneurs. Sometimes they launch small ventures. Sometimes they dedicate themselves to solving community problems. The activity itself matters less than the direction. They continue moving forward.
Forward movement keeps the mind alive. That is the first brutal rule I give retirees. Never stop building something meaningful. Not because society demands it, because your mind demands it. The second rule makes some people uncomfortable. Age is often treated as a signal that ambition should shrink. That belief quietly poisons many lives. I was 55 when my company crossed the billion-dollar mark. Many people assume extraordinary achievements belong to youth. History disagrees. Some of the most impactful companies, inventions, and social movements were started by people in their 50s and 60s. But society repeats a message so frequently that many people accept it without questioning. You have already done enough. That sentence sounds supportive, yet it quietly pushes people towards stagnation. Imagine telling a writer they have written enough stories, or telling a musician they have played enough music. Creative minds do not retire easily. They continue producing. Business builders share a similar instinct. Creating something new produces energy. That energy becomes addictive. The mistake many retirees make is believing their ability to contribute has expired. But contribution does not expire with age. It expires when belief disappears. I explained this idea during another conference. A woman approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. She told me she had retired from engineering 3 years earlier. At first she felt relief. Then boredom arrived. She began doubting her value. Her confidence faded slowly. When she heard my talk, something shifted. She realized she had not lost her abilities. She had simply stopped using them. Months later, she contacted me again. She had started consulting for small companies. helping younger engineers solve technical problems. Her schedule filled quickly. The excitement in her message was unmistakable. That experience reminded me why these conversations matter. Many people quietly believe their productive years are finished, but that belief is rarely based on reality. It is based on social expectations, expectations that underestimate human potential. The third rule surprises people even more. Never allow comfort to replace curiosity. Comfort is seductive. After decades of work, the idea of permanent relaxation feels deserved. But curiosity is the engine that keeps the mind expanding. Without curiosity, the world becomes smaller. New technologies appear. New industries form. New ideas reshape society. People who remain curious stay connected to that evolution. People who withdraw from curiosity slowly disconnect, and disconnection eventually leads to irrelevance. That word sounds harsh, yet it describes what happens when someone stops engaging with the changing world. Relevance is not about fame or status. It is about participation, feeling that your actions still matter, feeling that your voice still contributes something useful. The final rule I share with retirees usually produces silence, because it challenges a deeply held fantasy. Many people imagine retirement as permanent happiness. They believe removing pressure will remove stress, but pressure has a hidden benefit. Pressure creates growth. Pressure reveals strengths. Pressure forces people to evolve. Without pressure, growth slows. That does not mean people should chase chaos endlessly, but they should not eliminate challenge completely. Challenges provide direction. Direction provides meaning. Meaning provides energy. That sequence shapes a fulfilling life far more reliably than unlimited leisure. When my talk ends, some retirees approach me looking thoughtful, others disagree strongly. Both reactions are valuable, because the goal of brutal advice is not comfort, it is awareness. I want people to question assumptions that society rarely challenges. The assumption that life gradually winds down after retirement. The assumption that ambition belongs only to youth. The assumption that comfort equals fulfillment. Those assumptions almost trapped me once. If I had accepted them during the darkest year of my life, I would have stopped fighting. The collapsing company would have remained abandoned. The lawsuits would have drained everything. The billion-dollar opportunity would never have existed. And the person telling this story would be living a very different life today. That realization leads to the most direct advice I give retirees. Advice that usually makes the entire room quiet. Your best chapter might still be unwritten, but writing that chapter requires something most people hesitate to embrace. Risk. Not reckless risk. Purposeful risk. Because every meaningful transformation I experienced began the same way, with uncertainty. And the next rule I share explains exactly how retirees can turn that uncertainty into the most powerful period of their lives. When I explain the next rule to retirees, the room usually grows very quiet, because this rule contradicts what many financial planners teach. The rule is simple. Never protect your life so much that it becomes smaller. For decades, people are trained to reduce risk, save carefully, invest cautiously, avoid mistakes. Those habits create stability, but stability can also become a cage, especially after retirement. Once income stops, many people become obsessed with protecting what they already have. Every decision becomes defensive. Every opportunity looks dangerous. Every new idea feels unnecessary. That mindset slowly shuts down the adventurous part of the human mind. The same instinct that once pushed them to build careers and raise families begins disappearing. I understand the fear behind it. After working for 40 years, people want security. They want peace, but security without growth becomes stagnation, and stagnation quietly steals something priceless: momentum. Momentum is not only financial, it is psychological. It is the feeling that your life is still expanding. When that feeling disappears, even wealthy people begin feeling trapped inside comfortable routines. I saw this pattern repeatedly after my company became successful. Investors would invite me to private gatherings, rooms filled with people who had accumulated enormous wealth, luxury homes, expensive cars, more financial security than most people could imagine. Yet many of them spoke about their lives with an unusual emptiness. Their biggest decisions involved small lifestyle changes, new vacation destinations, new hobbies, but nothing that carried real stakes, nothing that demanded courage, nothing that forced them to grow again. I began noticing something interesting. The individuals who looked the most alive in those rooms were not the ones who had stopped working. They were the ones still building something. Sometimes it was a new business, sometimes a charity project, sometimes a risky investment in an emerging technology. Their conversations were different. Their eyes were sharper. Their curiosity was stronger. They still had something on the line. That difference fascinated me. because the presence of risk had always been part of my most meaningful experiences. The collapsing company I bought during the lawsuit carried enormous uncertainty. Every decision could have failed, but that risk created focus, intensity, drive. The same principle applies to retirement. Eliminating all risk might protect money, but it can quietly eliminate excitement. Without excitement, the mind becomes passive, and passive living rarely produces fulfillment. One retiree once told me something that captured this perfectly. He said his financial advisor had designed a perfect retirement plan: predictable income, minimal risk, everything carefully calculated to last 30 years. At first he felt proud of that security. Then gradually he realized something uncomfortable. His future had become completely predictable. Every year looked the same, every decision already optimized. Nothing unexpected, nothing challenging, nothing that required courage. He told me the plan felt less like freedom and more like a carefully designed waiting room. Waiting rooms are comfortable, but they are not places where people build meaningful lives. That conversation reminded me why risk matters so much. Risk creates possibility. Possibility creates energy. Energy creates engagement. Engagement creates meaning. That chain reaction cannot exist in a completely controlled environment. Of course, reckless decisions destroy lives, but thoughtful risks often expand them. That is why I encourage retirees to treat their experience as an asset. Decades of knowledge create advantages younger entrepreneurs rarely possess: pattern recognition, emotional discipline, strategic thinking. Those qualities can turn small ideas into powerful ventures, yet many retirees underestimate their own value. They assume the world only rewards youth. They assume innovation belongs to younger generations. Reality tells a different story. Some of the most successful founders started companies after 50, not because they had more energy, because they had more perspective. Perspective shortens the path to good decisions. It allows people to avoid mistakes they once made. It allows them to recognize opportunities hidden inside chaos. I saw this clearly after leaving my short experiment with retirement. The companies I began advising and investing in benefited from decades of experience. Problems that confused younger executives often appeared familiar to me. Patterns repeated across industries. Human behavior repeated across negotiations. Those insights turned into profitable decisions repeatedly. The process felt natural, not exhausting, because purpose generates its own energy. That realization leads to the final principle I share with retirees. The most valuable asset you possess is not money. It is accumulated wisdom. Money can disappear, markets collapse, investments fail, but experience remains. Experience allows people to rebuild repeatedly. It allows them to guide others. It allows them to recognize opportunities invisible to less experienced minds. When retirees ignore that asset, the world loses something powerful. Decades of lessons vanish quietly, and individuals who could still shape industries convince themselves their role has ended. I refuse to accept that belief, not after witnessing what happened during the most chaotic year of my life, because the moment I faced the greatest uncertainty was also the moment that created the greatest opportunity. And that is the message I now deliver at the end of every talk, the message that usually changes the atmosphere in the room. Retirement should not be the end of your impact. It should be the beginning of your most fearless chapter, because when financial survival is no longer the goal, people gain something rare: the freedom to build purely for meaning. And meaning is the most powerful form of wealth anyone can create. But before every audience leaves, I give them one last warning, a warning that explains why so many people struggle after retirement, and why the difference between fulfillment and regret often depends on a single decision made long before retirement begins. At the end of every talk, someone asks the same question. It usually comes from the back of the room, a voice filled with curiosity, sometimes anxiety. Then what is the biggest mistake retirees make? The answer is uncomfortable. Not financial mistakes, not bad investments. The biggest mistake happens long before retirement begins. People build their entire identity around a single role, a title, a profession, a company. For decades that role defines who they are, their routine, their purpose, their social circle, their sense of value. Then retirement removes that role overnight. The structure disappears, and suddenly the person is left asking a question they never expected. Who am I now? Many people are not prepared for that moment.
because they spent 40 years strengthening one identity: employee, manager, executive, engineer, doctor. When that identity disappears, the silence that follows can feel terrifying. I saw this pattern while watching former colleagues retire. Some adapted well, others struggled quietly. The difference was simple. The ones who adapted had built more than one identity. They were mentors, builders, learners, investors, writers, advisors. Their purpose had multiple branches. Removing one branch did not destroy the entire tree, but the ones who defined themselves by a single professional role faced a deeper shock. Their daily mission vanished. Their sense of usefulness faded. Their conversations shifted toward memories instead of plans, and slowly their energy declined. That is why I tell people something long before retirement arrives. Do not build a life that collapses when one chapter ends. Build a life that contains many chapters. During my career, I was never only a corporate employee. I studied industries. I invested in small ideas. I explored markets. I learned constantly. Those habits created mental flexibility. When my job disappeared unexpectedly, I did not lose my entire identity. I simply moved toward another role: builder, entrepreneur, problem solver. Those roles had always existed inside me. The crisis simply forced them to the surface. Retirees who maintain that flexibility experience retirement differently.
They do not view it as an ending. They view it as a transition. Freedom from one role creates space for another. A new project, a new venture, a new challenge. One retiree once told me something powerful after hearing my story. He said he had spent decades climbing the corporate ladder, but he had also built something quietly on the side, a small educational platform teaching young people financial literacy. When he retired, that project became his full focus. He told me the work felt more meaningful than his corporate career ever had, because now he was building something entirely by choice. Choice transforms work. When survival depends on income, work often feels like obligation. When financial independence arrives, work can transform into contribution. Contribution is powerful. It connects individuals to something larger than themselves. It gives each day direction. It creates new relationships. It stimulates curiosity. And most importantly, it generates meaning. Meaning is the true engine of fulfillment. Without meaning, leisure eventually becomes empty. With meaning, even difficult work becomes satisfying. That truth became obvious during the year my life collapsed. While facing lawsuits and financial uncertainty, I never felt meaningless. Every action mattered. Every decision carried weight. The stakes created purpose. After achieving financial freedom, I briefly removed that pressure. The result surprised me. Comfort alone did not satisfy the mind. Purpose did. That realization changed how I structure my life permanently. Today my calendar still contains challenges, new ventures, advisory roles, projects designed to solve real problems. Not because I need more wealth, because movement keeps the mind alive, and the mind must stay alive long after the bank account reaches security. That is the truth many retirement plans ignore. They focus entirely on financial survival. They calculate expenses. They estimate life expectancy. They project investment returns. But they rarely ask a deeper question. What will give your life meaning after work ends? Without answering that question, even the most perfect financial plan can lead to quiet dissatisfaction. With meaning, even modest resources can produce fulfilling lives. That is why my advice to retirees often sounds brutal, because it challenges a comforting fantasy. The fantasy that happiness automatically appears once work stops. Happiness rarely arrives through absence. It grows through engagement. Engagement with ideas, with people, with challenges, with the evolving world. Retirement does not remove the human need for engagement. It simply removes the structure that once provided it. What replaces that structure determines the quality of the next chapter. That is why I end every talk with one final thought, a sentence that forces people to reconsider how they view the future. Retirement is not the moment you stop building your life. It is the moment you gain the freedom to build it exactly the way you want. But that freedom only becomes powerful if you decide to use it, and the people who use it wisely often create the most extraordinary chapter of their entire lives. Before every audience leaves, I share something even more direct. Because after years of conversations with retirees, one pattern appears again and again. Many people plan their finances carefully, but they never plan their purpose. They calculate how much money they need.
They rarely calculate how much meaning they need. The absence of that calculation creates problems later. When work disappears, time expands. Suddenly there are long mornings with nothing scheduled, afternoons with no urgency, evenings without accomplishment. At first it feels peaceful. Then something subtle changes. Days begin blending together. One week looks similar to the next. Without noticing it, people begin drifting through time instead of shaping it. Drifting is dangerous because it feels comfortable. It does not feel like failure, but it slowly removes direction. Direction gives life momentum. Without momentum, people lose their sense of progress, and without progress, satisfaction fades. That is why I give retirees a challenge that surprises them. I tell them to design a mission, not a hobby, not casual entertainment. A mission, something that requires discipline, something that benefits other people, something that demands commitment. Missions create responsibility. Responsibility keeps people mentally sharp. One retired doctor once told me about the moment they discovered this truth. After leaving their hospital position, they planned to relax for several years. The first 6 months felt wonderful. Travel, family time, rest. Then boredom started appearing. Not dramatic boredom, a quiet feeling that something meaningful was missing. Eventually they began volunteering at a community clinic once a week, then twice a week. Soon they were helping organize healthcare access for entire neighborhoods. Their schedule filled again. Their energy returned. Their sense of usefulness expanded beyond anything they expected. They told me retirement had not removed their purpose. It had simply redirected it. That conversation reinforced something powerful. Human beings are not designed for passive existence. We are designed to solve problems, to create value, to contribute. When those instincts are ignored, something inside us weakens. But when those instincts are activated again, energy returns immediately. This is why many entrepreneurs struggle with retirement. The habit of building becomes deeply rooted. Removing it feels unnatural. The same instinct exists in many people who spent their careers solving complex problems. They simply forget that the instinct still exists. Society sends subtle signals that older individuals should step aside, make space, slow down. Those messages sound polite, yet they quietly push capable people toward inactivity. I reject that idea completely. Experience is one of the most valuable resources in the world. When experienced individuals withdraw entirely, entire industries lose wisdom, entire communities lose guidance, entire generations lose mentors. That loss is rarely discussed, but it is enormous. Some of the most transformative ideas come from individuals who have lived long enough to see patterns others miss. They understand consequences. They recognize repeating cycles. They carry lessons earned through failure. Those qualities cannot be manufactured quickly. They develop over decades. And retirement often hides them from the world exactly when they are most valuable.
That is why I encourage retirees to shift their thinking. Instead of asking how to stop working, ask how to work differently. Less pressure, more purpose, less obligation, more freedom. The goal is not exhaustion. The goal is engagement. Engagement creates vitality. Vitality keeps the mind and body active. Active people continue influencing the world around them, and influence brings satisfaction that leisure alone cannot deliver. One retired teacher once described it perfectly. They said the happiest moment of their retirement came when a former student contacted them years later. That student had built a successful career and credited their teacher for early encouragement. The teacher realized something profound in that moment. Their influence had never retired. It had continued expanding quietly through the lives they touched. That realization gave them more fulfillment than any vacation could provide. Moments like that reveal the deeper purpose behind this advice. Retirement should expand your impact, not erase it. It should allow you to choose where your experience matters most. It should give you the freedom to contribute without the limitations that once controlled your schedule. But this only happens when people actively choose it. If they drift into passive living, the opportunity disappears. And that leads to the final piece of advice I give every retiree. Advice that many people resist hearing at first. But once they understand it, their entire perspective changes. Because the greatest risk in retirement is not running out of money. The greatest risk is running out of purpose. And when purpose disappears, even a life of comfort can begin feeling strangely empty. That is why the final message I leave with every audience is brutally honest. The world still needs what you know. The only question is whether you decide to use it. When the room becomes quiet at the end of my talks, I know people are thinking. Some are reconsidering retirement plans. Some are remembering dreams they abandoned years earlier. Others are realizing something they had never questioned before. Their life is not finished just because their career ended. That realization can be powerful, but it also creates responsibility, because once someone understands that purpose must continue, they must decide what to do next, and that decision determines everything that follows. I always end with a story, not about business, not about billion-dollar companies, a much smaller story. Years ago, after my legal battles ended and my company began expanding rapidly, I visited the factory late one evening. Most employees had already gone home. Machines were silent. The building felt enormous and quiet. I walked through the production floor, remembering the day I first stepped inside that same factory. At that time, everything looked broken. Machines idle, employees discouraged, debt hanging over every decision. Everyone believed the company would disappear within months. Yet something inside that chaos had caught my attention. Possibility. The possibility that decline could be reversed. That belief started a chain reaction. One decision led to another. One risk led to another. One problem solved opened the door to another opportunity. None of it was predictable. None of it felt comfortable. But step by step the company transformed. Eventually that same building produced products shipped across multiple continents. Thousands of employees depended on the business. Entire supply chains grew around it, and the company that once looked finished became a billion-dollar enterprise. Standing there that evening, I realized something powerful. That transformation started because someone refused to believe the story was over. Many retirees face a similar moment. They stand at the edge of a new chapter, wondering what comes next. Society often whispers a simple answer: nothing. Relax. Step aside. Let life slow down. But that answer assumes something dangerous. It assumes the story has already reached its final chapter. I reject that assumption completely. Human potential does not operate on a retirement schedule. Curiosity does not disappear automatically with age. Creativity does not expire at 60. Contribution does not end because someone receives a pension. Those ideas only become true when people accept them. When someone decides their role in the world has finished, their behavior slowly begins confirming that belief. But the opposite is also true. When someone decides their experience still has value, new possibilities begin appearing. Mentorship, entrepreneurship, community leadership, creative work, innovation. The forms are endless. What matters is the decision to remain engaged with life. Engagement creates energy. Energy creates momentum. Momentum keeps the mind and spirit alive. That is the message I leave with every retiree. Do not measure your future only by the size of your savings. Measure it by the size of your curiosity. Measure it by the problems you still want to solve. Measure it by the people whose lives you can still influence. Because wealth alone cannot sustain a fulfilling life. Purpose can. Purpose gives each morning direction. Purpose transforms time into opportunity. Purpose keeps the story moving forward. And that is the real lesson behind everything I experienced. The lawsuits, the betrayals, the collapsing company, the billion-dollar breakthrough. None of those events were the true victory. The real victory was discovering that life expands whenever we continue building something meaningful. So if you are retired or thinking about retirement, remember this one thing: your career may end, but your capacity to create value does not. Your ability to influence the world does not. Your potential for growth does not. The only thing that can end those possibilities is the decision to stop using them. And if there is one brutal piece of advice I want every retiree to remember, it is this: never retire from purpose. Because the moment you stop building your life, life slowly stops building you. Never retire from purpose. Because the moment you stop building your life, life slowly stops building you. Just tell me, and I will transform this into a viral-ready YouTube narration script. Like closing message. Here is a powerful closing message for your YouTube story that fits the tone of the script and works well for a faceless narration video. Writing. If you are retired or thinking about retiring, listen carefully. The world told you that one day you should stop building, stop pushing, stop creating. Just relax and let the rest of life pass quietly. But after everything I lived through, I learned something very different. Money can give you comfort, but purpose gives you life. The moment you stop challenging yourself, the moment you stop solving problems, the moment you stop creating something meaningful, life begins shrinking around you. Age does not end your ability to build something powerful. Only your decision does. The truth is simple. Your career may end. Your job title may disappear. Your office may close behind you. But your experience, your wisdom, your ability to change someone else's life, that never expires. So if you remember one thing from this story, remember this:
Never retire from purpose, because the moment you stop building your life, life slowly stops building you. If this story made you rethink retirement, subscribe to the channel and watch the next story, because the lessons that change lives are rarely the comfortable ones. Because the moment you stop building your life, life slowly stops building you. If this story made you rethink retirement, subscribe to the channel and watch the next story, because the lessons that change lives are rarely the comfortable ones.